All right, everyone. Thank you for stopping by and taking the time to listen to our webinar on Suntheanine today. My name is Braxton Wright. I am the Central Region Sales Manager for NutraScience Innovations. Just a little bit of background on what we're going to do today. Our team, Mallory and myself, I'll allow her to introduce herself in a minute. We're going to go over some of the background, overview, and science of Suntheanine, and then we're going to hand it off to Bryce Wild, a functional medicine clinician. He's going to go into some more detail, go through a Q&A section, answer some of the questions you have, and then we will end it from there. You'll have a chance to ask questions. Please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box as Mallory and myself are going along, and then Bryce is as well, and we'll get to those towards the end. From there, like I said, my name is Braxton Wright, Central Region Sales Manager with NutraScience Innovations. My background is in clinical nutrition, bachelor's in clinical nutrition and a master's in sports nutrition. Been around in the branded ingredient field for a while now, working with mainly highly substantiated branded ingredients for sports nutrition, overall health, and a bunch of different claims. Mallory, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. Hi, my name is Mallory Goggins. I am an R&D scientist at NutraScience Innovations. My background is in food science, both my bachelor's and my master's degree. So I work on the ingredient side of things here. I help support our current products, help with any technical questions that come up, and I work on new product development too.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right, so what we're doing today is we're going over Suntheanine. This is our L-theanine, the original, the most unique L-theanine on the market. This is the one, when you think of an L-theanine, it is Suntheanine. It's been around for 30 plus years, and it was the original. So what is it? Suntheanine is purely L-theanine, the L isomer. That's important because that is exactly what we'd be getting out of the green tea plant. And Suntheanine is produced using a fermentation process that mimics that of the green tea leaves. Go in that in a little bit more detail as well. What it does, and where a lot of the claims are coming from, is its impact and its regulation of brainwaves. So it increases alpha waves, which are that relaxed state that you'd be feeling, and then reduces beta brain waves, which would be a hyperexcitatory state, something that you'd feel with like caffeine or whatnot. So it promotes this alert yet relaxed state, kind of like a Zen state or a very focused, like in the zone would be maybe a flow state, what people use as the definition there. Suntheanine has hundreds of clinical and scientific studies to support a wide range of claims for your brand and your consumers. It touches on stress, anxiety, relaxation, sleep, focus, pet health, children's health, women's health. It goes across a ton of different claims, and we'll touch on some of those. But honestly, there isn't enough time in the day to really touch on all the claims that are available for Suntheanine. So if there's something that kind of piques your interest and you want to have a deeper conversation, please feel free to reach out. There will be an email that I'll point out later on in our section that you can reach out to, and we'd be happy to have a further in-depth conversation with you. One of the main unique things about Suntheanine as well is it's the only L-theanine on the market with any sort of safety and toxicology studies. You'll see some synthetic materials out there. They're not supported by any of the clinical or scientific studies, and they definitely don't have any safety or toxicology studies. So Suntheanine is the only one that you'd really want to be using if you want bulletproof background clinical support, whether it's for safety or efficacy of the material. So why does this all matter, and why are we here to talk about Suntheanine? Suntheanine is one of those ingredients that's been around for 30 years, and it continues to shine in a ton of different claim areas that consumers are concerned about. Stress, emotional well-being, basically like working from home during the COVID era, which has continued and looks to be continuing for probably forever at this point, are top concerns for consumers today. So it really falls into a lot of those places where consumers are concerned about. Stress being one of those, quality of sleep being another one. Sleep has so many impacts on the rest of your day, so it's obviously a huge concern as well. Suntheanine delivers what consumers want. Strong scientific safety, efficacy, and results that they can feel and see. Suntheanine, when I say you can feel Suntheanine, it's acutely effective. It's experiential. So the first dose, you're noticing the benefits. And that's really why caffeine is probably the most used functional ingredient in the world. I mean, you can get it from tea, coffee, a handful of other botanicals as well. It's because you can feel it, it's experiential. So caffeine, you feel that stimulation. Suntheanine, you would get a similar quickness of feel, but from the relaxation side. Or you could take it with caffeine and it helps tone down a lot of that jitteriness that comes from caffeine itself. And then Suntheanine has recognition in the market. Consumers know what it is. It's been around for a long time and it has a strong market identity. And it does demand a premium when it comes to products, whether they're standalone or synergistic combination products. So Suntheanine is just, it's a good way to add kind of subliminal marketing to your product as well. So I keep mentioning how old Suntheanine is, and it's unique because there's not a lot of ingredients out there that have been used functionally for basically 30 years. Taiyo, our partner who produces this material, they're a Japanese-based company, do a lot of great products. All of them have clinical and scientific support that just outweighs the vast majority of what you're going to see with products out there on the market nowadays. But Suntheanine is one of those products that was kind of like their bread and it is their bread and butter. It's produced in Japan, introduced in Japan in 1994. Over the next 20 to 30 years has received a ton of different food awards in the functional and food spaces. Received FDA affirmed GRAS. It is also non-GMO project verified. It's received a ton of different awards over those years, and for good reason. A ton of clinical support for adults, humans, animals, or adults, children, and animals. So it's just very, very functional in a lot of different spaces. And then the research still continues. Like I say, we have a couple hundred studies on it, scientific and clinical. But that's not like we stopped. There's still scientific studies going on to support new claim areas that are popping up in the consumer's mind. There's always new things popping up that are of interest, like stress has been a big one. So that has been pursued. Women's health has been pursued. We're always trying to keep up with what the consumers and brands are wanting and what they're coming to us asking for as well. So I touched on how Suntheanine is a unique product because of how it is produced. You will see synthetic materials out there. They're just not the same quality, and they don't have the same kind of claim when it comes to the production process. So what makes Suntheanine really unique is it is produced using a fermentation process that mimics what happens in the actual green tea plant. In the green tea plant, you have this fermentation happening in the roots and then the storage of L-theanine in the leaves. We do this on a commercial scale, combining that amino acid and amine through this very unique fermentation process to create Suntheanine. This is patented, very unique, not something that anybody else is doing. It makes it basically a bioidentical functional compound that's commercially available. The reason we don't pull it from the green tea plants is because essentially it's not sustainable. You can't just go out there and pull up all the green tea plants to make Suntheanine. The yield in the leaves is relatively low percentage-wise, so you'd be pulling up basically every green tea plant on the planet to get what we would need for Suntheanine. So sustainability-wise, this is the absolute route to go to get something that is basically exactly what you would get in nature. So to go into some of the benefits, and Mallory's going to touch on scientific side a little bit more in depth and a little bit in broader range, but there's a ton of different cognitive benefits that come from Suntheanine, and a lot of these are coming from the brainwave homeostasis that kind of Suntheanine provides. So you'll see a reduction in stress, nervous irritability, basically everything that's going to be surrounding stress. Also increases in focus, restoration of mental alertness, reductions in negative side effects from caffeine. So it helps you kind of hone in that overall jitteriness of caffeine that a lot of us would feel from too much coffee, or tea, I guess, can add it as well, or energy drinks are a huge thing nowadays. So that could be part of what's impacting that. And then relaxation and sleep. It actually improves quality of sleep, which honestly, that quality of sleep claim is going to impact stress, focus, and mental performance. So it touches all of these other boxes as well. And then reduces restlessness. So it's going to help you kind of get to bed easier, faster, less time laying around in bed, just waiting to fall asleep potentially. And then it also improves mental performance during mental tasks, during mental challenges. So like when you're in meetings, essentially back-to-back meetings, you kind of get that brain drain. It's a similar idea of maintaining that level of performance mentally across many different meetings or consecutive meetings is something that suntheanine has a good impact on as well. And then a lot of these, you can correlate them to either the office space. Now that a lot of people are working from home and you're back-to-back Zoom meetings, you get that brain drain. But then it also correlates to physical activities, whether it's workouts, either very hard physical or technical, like golfing, or maybe like a gymnast or something along that lines, where you kind of have to combine those two and staying on point for long. So I will let Mallory hop in here and talk about some of the more specifics on mechanism of action in science.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Braxton, for such a good introduction. Braxton told us a lot about what suntheanine can do for us, and I would like to talk a little bit more about how this all works. So one thing that we do know about suntheanine is that it can cross the blood-brain barrier. And that's an important thing to note, because the blood-brain barrier, or the barrier between what's in our blood and what reaches the brain, is really tightly regulated. Our brains are very sensitive organs, so they are very well protected by this barrier. However, that also means that sometimes things don't get in, and actually GABA, an ingredient that some people take to get some of the similar effects that can come from suntheanine, is not known to cross through the blood-brain barrier. So we have seen that theanine crosses through the blood-brain barrier, and then in the brain can be converted into GABA, which is a very important signaling molecule in the brain, and theanine can also interact with some GABA receptors itself. Next slide, please, Braxton. Thank you. So Braxton touched on this. This is the sort of mechanism of action that happens once theanine gets into the brain. There are a few different types or categories of brain waves. Two of those belong to the awake state of mind and being. And those are alpha waves and brain waves. Alpha waves refer to the brain waves produced when we are awake, but we are relaxed, we're calm, we're chilled, and we're not too worked up or nervous or anything like that. Beta brain waves, on the other hand, occur in the brain when we are very stimulated, we're anxious, or we're nervous, excited. And so a balance between alpha and beta brain waves is important for helping us remain in a calmer state of being, something that is harder and harder to do these days. So on the right side of the slide here, you can see a figure that came from a study on suntheanine. The bottom row is an image of a participant's brain who participated in this study. And the red that is coming up in those images, imagine it's sort of like a heat map. So the increasing amount of red is showing that the amplitude of alpha waves is increasing in that person's brain. Next slide, please, Braxton. Thank you. So once we get that effect from the alpha brain waves, what happens really? So we've talked a little bit about these claims, but let's talk more about how we know that we can use those claims. So we have two graphs here that show two different studies. On the left side is a graph from a study using suntheanine in students doing their pharmacy practice. They're in pharmacy school. So over the course of 7 days, some students took suntheanine and some took a placebo. They asked these students how they were feeling in terms of stress while they were studying, doing exams, etc. And you can see a significantly lower response in stress from the students who were taking suntheanine. On the right side is a graph from a different study where they surveyed women who were experiencing PMS and asked them a lot about those symptoms or moods that can sometimes come with PMS that aren't so desirable. Things like anger, anxiety, crying, irritability, nervousness, and mood swings, all of which were significantly reduced in the women who were taking suntheanine versus the control. Next slide. So Braxton also brought up sleep, and here's a study that we have on sleep. The main graph in the middle of this slide, there are two graphs there actually. The one on the far left side, it says less awakening during sleep period. And what that refers to is the amount of time while we are supposed to be asleep that we are actually awake. So imagine you wake up a lot during the night and you don't want to, or you're laying in bed trying to fall asleep. So what they measured was the amount of time that people spent awake during that period over the night where they meant to be asleep. And the amount of time spent awake was significantly reduced in those who took suntheanine before they went to sleep. On the right side of this figure, the one that says more time asleep, this one is similar. It refers to the actual time spent asleep versus time spent in bed. So in comparison to the hours, minutes you spent in your bed trying to fall asleep or trying to sleep, how many of those were you actually asleep for? So suntheanine users had a significant increase in the percentage of time that they were actually asleep. A huge benefit for people who have issues with insomnia or who just wake up throughout the night. The way we sleep, there is a lot of increasing, ever exciting evidence that it's not just the amount of time that we're sleeping, but sleep quality plays a huge role in how we feel the next day. So suntheanine can be a big help for that sort of thing. In the blue box on the right side of the far right side of the slide here, there is a little blurb about another study we have that looked at suntheanine use in children who had been diagnosed with ADHD. Poor sleep quality is actually tied really closely to ADHD. And as we know, in the average person, poor sleep quality makes you a little bit less optimally functioning the next day. But these children who did take suntheanine before going to sleep, their parents reported a significant decrease in hyperactive behavior the next day. Hugely impactful for children who are possibly struggling when they go to school. Next slide, please. Okay, so now to talk about some of these other cognitive benefits that suntheanine can help with, aside from stress and mood and sleep. We can also see the actual performance of our brain as it's working improve with suntheanine. So this study looked at participants' responses, reaction time to a sort of test they were doing on a computer. And when they measured their reaction time compared to placebo, those who were taking suntheanine had a significantly lower reaction time. And the effect is actually a lot larger in the group of participants who had higher anxiety. And you can also see from these graphs that the effects begin 15 minutes after consuming suntheanine. So like Braxton said, this is an experiential product that you can feel kick in, especially during a mental challenge like this. And these sort of results are really exciting considering how popular it is getting to play video games. Some people even make gaming their careers. And that right now is a very underserved market. They have caffeine to help mentally stimulate them, but that comes with its negative side effects. So that is a huge market looking for opportunities, and suntheanine could really help with that. Next slide, please. So this is actually from the same study. They didn't just measure reaction time, but they also measured the correct response ratio. So it's one thing if you're answering quickly, but it's another thing if you're answering quickly and correctly. So they saw a significant increase in correct responses from those who took suntheanine. Also, the effect is greater in participants with higher anxiety levels, and they saw this starting to happen at only 15 minutes after consuming suntheanine. Next slide, please. And here is a summary of just a few other things that we have seen in our studies. Improved focus and attention based on a word reading test, enhanced memory with a verbal test rather, increased performance during combined physical and mental tasks. So this one actually looked at golf performance in golf players. They saw that with suntheanine, some of their golf performance metrics actually improved. And then finally, improved executive functioning, which refers to how well and how quickly our brains are operating as we're using them. Next slide, please. Okay, and then finally, Braxton touched on this a little bit, and I just want to go into it a little bit deeper. The blue spotlight at the top right of this slide says that suntheanine reduces the negative side effects of caffeine. What we mean by that is when we have that good balance of alpha and beta brain waves, you don't get as many of the undesirable side effects of caffeine, like the jitteriness, or sometimes when you're too caffeinated, it's harder to focus despite the intention. But suntheanine helps take in that stimulation from the caffeine without it kind of overtaking the body and overstimulating. So these graphs on the bottom of this slide show a study that looked at participants, similar to previous slides, correct responses and response times to a computer test. And they saw a significantly larger number of correct responses and reduced response time from suntheanine plus caffeine, more than even caffeine alone, as well as placebo. So there have been proven effects of this synergistic combination. Next slide. All right, then I will turn it over to you, Braxton.
Yeah. So obviously suntheanine has a ton of benefits for humans, kids, and a ton of different claims in there as well, but it also has benefits for pets. And a lot of the scientific studies, obviously, as you know, you start off with testing with animals and then humans as well. What you're going to see for pets is a lot of the stress kind of related benefits, separation anxiety, loud noises, environmental changes like thunderstorms are really going to be the benefits that you'd be using suntheanine for in pets. I know I have 4 dogs. One hates loud noises, anything, gunshots, thunderstorms. She's running for the doggy door and hiding in the closets. Like this would be something that would be very applicable for her. And then there's some breeds out there that are mainly or highly susceptible to higher anxiety. And then a lot of that you can use in a lot of different applications for pets as well, which makes suntheanine a great product for a lot of human products as well. It can be used in chews, tablets, liquid additions for like their water, top dressings for their foods as well. And this is just a marketplace that's been growing for years and years. And honestly, at this point, really don't see it slowing down. To touch on some of the structure function claims, we've touched on a lot of these, but relaxation is going to be a huge one. It's kind of that correlation to seeing like monks drink tea and then like the Zen calm that's kind of associated with that as well, since theanine is present in tea leaves. So it's promoting relaxation, reduces restlessness, reduces stress. There's going to be a ton of claims that you can make in there. Improves quality of sleep, improves alertness, promotes focus and concentration, and then also reduces those negative side effects of caffeine as well. That's why in the energy drink space, it'd be a great application because the 200 milligrams, 300, even 400 milligrams per dosing, I mean, kind of honing in that stimulation to something that's a little bit more focused and you can keep in line instead of just being stimulated and all over the board. It'd be a great addition to the caffeine because caffeine does have a ton of benefits. And then women's health, PMS, that's another great place that there's actually some good claims for suntheanine as well. There's not a ton of products that have those claims, but suntheanine would be a great addition there for a synergistic ingredient. So formulating with suntheanine, honestly, it covers a lot of the bases. Allergen-free, FDA affirmed as GRAS. It's vegan, kosher, halal, non-GMO project verified. There's a ton of other claims that are in there as well, but pretty much anything the brand or the consumer are looking for in terms of quality claims, suntheanine is really going to cover. It makes it a really easy product to work with. And then also formulating it into products makes it easy as well. Like I said, powders, tablets, capsules, gummies, soft gels, basically whatever you're looking to do. It doesn't have a flavor. It's highly water soluble, small dosing, 50 to 200 milligrams is really where you're looking at. That 200 milligram is kind of like the full clinical dose. But then when you're adding in with synergistic ingredients, down to 50 has some great claims with it as well to kind of substantiate the product as a whole. And then again, FDA affirmed as GRAS. It just makes it a really easy product to work with and get it in different product formats as well. So if you're looking to kind of compare to what's on the market and just see what's out there and the brands that are willing to put their name behind suntheanine specifically, you're probably going to recognize a lot of these products. Sports Research, Doctor's Best, Nature's Way, some of the largest products or largest brands in this industry are using suntheanine. It's because you can make those claims and you don't have to worry about anything on the back end. The clinical and scientific information is there. You're supported, and it's just one of those ingredients that it's kind of like you said it, and you don't have to worry at all. There's no real fluctuation. We have a really strong supply as well, if that's the concern. But these are just some of the brands that are out on the market. I'm sure you recognize at least a few. So if you have any questions, I mentioned I'll show you a email that at the top and at the end of the first sentence, sales@nutriscienceusa.com is a great place to reach us. You can also touch base with any of our social media. Our team will definitely get it onto the correct person where we can answer as well. We really appreciate you listening to Mallory and I give you some of the background information, some of the very honestly preliminary scientific information. There's so much more out there. So if you have specific questions or concerns, feel free to reach out. We will go more in depth with you on them. Absolutely. And then I want to hand it off to Bryce Wild. Bryce, whenever you're ready, please take it away.
Hey guys, thanks so much. Mallory, Braxton, that was excellent. I never stopped learning, and there were some few excellent nuggets in there for some wonderful takeaways for me as well. I'm going to share my screen, or is it that you guys have the slides?
We do not, so I'll stop sharing mine and then you can go ahead.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Let's see. All right. So for anyone who's into humor, here we go. This is the kind of patient that I'm typically seeing in clinical practice myself. I kind of see two different patient silos, those that are wellness seekers. They're looking to go from good to better, and those individuals who are health seekers, those who have problems with their health and they're looking to solve those problems. This particular patient here, I probably put in a split silo. I've been in clinical practice for well over 20 years now, and one of the biggest challenges I face is with the stress paradox. I think it's the #1 North American-wide silent killer, and it's not benign. Contributes to diabetes, heart disease, even the big C, cancer. So we got to crack the code on this. And of course, this isn't just about crossing our arms and our legs and meditating like a Buddhist monk, or learning how, or for that matter, maybe even clocking more hours on the pillow. As I just heard you guys allude to, there's a lot more about quality sleep. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. How to enhance sleep, how to reduce stress effectively, and ultimately how to sharpen the mind. But before I move to my next slide, there may be humor in this slide, but there's some significant innuendos, and I'll be coming back to this as we go through this presentation. So it's not all that humorous. I just wrote a book, Brain Spanners, where the theme of this book was entertaining the idea of health span. So we know it's no longer about lifespan, simply the days or weeks or years that you'll experience life on this planet, but living your best life in the most optimal form of health. So that's health span. Brain span is all about living your best life, optimal health, with full mental faculty. So some major learnings that have come out of that particular book, writing that book for me, starts off with this, neurogenesis. We have come to learn that really all we have is the brain cells that we're born into this world with. They mature, they create new connections, they form new friends, so to speak. And then by the age of approximately 7, 8 years old, early school, primary school age, they die off. This is the old story we've been told. Not true. There is new supply ongoing, particularly in the hippocampus, in the part of the brain responsible for memory and new memories. So when you treat your brain right, we'll talk a little bit about that as well, including obviously supplementing with Suntheanine, you are enhancing neurogenesis and new supply of neurons on the daily. Your brain is also plastic, neuroplasticity. So this concept is that we're constantly forming new connections and we're disconnecting all the time. In fact, we talk a lot about memory as it's retaining ideas and forms of things we've learned But memory it's just as important for a good and robust memory to forget. And so uncoupling becomes as important as coupling when it comes to brain health. And then the old Hebb's law, neurons that fire together, wire together. And this concept is all about how when a cell persistently activates around another cell, the connection between those two becomes stronger. And that is really driven. We are bioelectric beings. So we are not just chemistry, or as you see here, neurochemicals flying between one neuron and the other. We are very much electrical. And so the depolarization of electricity that happens within the presynaptic cleft, that is the firing neuron, and then received in the postsynaptic cleft, the receiving neuron, is just as important. And that plays a role here as well as it relates to brain waves, as I heard Braxton allude to earlier, something that suntheanine can manage or mitigate. And then I've come to learn that there are significant genetic predispositions to stress. These vary, of course, person to person. You cannot change your DNA. You can't change your genes. They are certainly what mom and dad have dealt you. The cards, if you will, by analogy, and now you need to learn how to play them in this game of life. But this is the really good news of the day, maybe the last decade or so, and that is you can manage genetic expression. So you can't change your DNA, but you can manage genetic expression. And that is ultimately through diet, lifestyle, and of course, what you put into your body through supplementation. And there are ways in which we can do this. I'm going to share 3 genes that I've become intimately familiar with through my clinical practice. So again, I check DNA aptitude, if you will, particularly executive function. That's learning about mood and behavior and the genes that control that. And it starts with this one very important gene called COMT, which is an acronym that stands for catechol-methyltransferase. So think of this really as an enzyme that's responsible in the brain to uncouple catecholamines from their receptors. So catecholamines being dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline primarily, which signal everything from feel-good reward through to stress. So the speed at which your enzyme, your COMT enzyme, uncouples these catecholamines plays a very important role. Some of us are slow, some of us are average, and some of us are very, very fast. Another genetic susceptibility that I look at within the executive function for mood and behavior is dopamine. We've come to learn this one as a feel-good, very much reward-based neurohormone. And so this gene, the dopamine receptor D2 gene, this encodes for how many receptors of dopamine one may be blessed with within their neurobiology. So some of us have a lot, some of us have sort of an average, moderate amount, and some of us have very few. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, as it pertains to the stress paradox, the ability to have deep and very effective rejuvenating sleep, and the ability to remain focused and have attention and the level of alertness and the ability to remain in the zone is the ADRA2B gene. So this gene, basically like dopamine receptor gene, controls for the amount of receptors that one might have or one is blessed with within their neurobiology for adrenaline. So some of us have a lot, some of us have an average amount, and some of us have very few. All right, now I'll hit the bottom line here. Whether you are a fast, average, or slow COMT, fast, average, or rather a lot, average amount, or a few dopamine receptors, or many average or few noradrenaline receptors, all factor in, to this game of life. The trends that I've seen in clinical practice is an individual who essentially has a very slow COMT. That is to say, adrenaline, noradrenaline sits in the nerve receptors for a very long time. So park that thought. They also have very few dopamine receptors. Again, this is just the clinical experience that I've had with individuals that come and see me. So this population will be somewhat skewed to the average population, which should make sense since they're often coming to me as health seekers. They've got a problem they want to solve. And then often they will have an abundance of these noradrenaline receptors. What is the combination of this? The combination of this is somebody who ultimately has a problem with focus, attention, alertness, concentration, tends within the spectrum of ADHD to be on the lesser attentive side and have challenges with focus, has a hard time falling asleep or maybe experiences latent sleep and or advanced phase sleep disorder, just waking up too early in the morning and mind racing and can't fall back asleep. So the idea is that the average individual coming to see me, their genetic susceptibility is one that is already more sort of shifted towards having a negative experience with stress. All right, and why do we think this? There's a lot of theories being thrown around, but first it's important, I believe, to understand our autonomic nervous system. So autonomic means automatic. It's something we don't have to think about, such as how often our heart beats or how often we're breathing every minute. The digestive function in our stomach and intestines and peristalsis. All these things are happening on autopilot. They are, however, significantly, very deeply influenced by our environment, and of course those genes and how we feed ourselves. So the two branches to the autonomic nervous system, very subconscious, unconscious part of our nervous system, is the sympathetic, and that is, we've coined this term, and where most of us were familiar with this, the fight or flight, and parasympathetic, or we call this rest and digest. Each of these branches are very much responsible for different things. This is a very short list. It's beyond theory. It's very well supported actually in the literature, but I want to sort of bring up again this concept in society. We are very much stuck due to our environment, due to work hours, due to so many of these what we now have normalized within society, working hours, loss of this connectivity to nature, social relationships, et cetera, certainly what the last few years have brought us. We are stuck within a sympathetic dominant state. It's really important to understand this because this is something that suntheanine can help us escape from, and or at least substantiate the biochemistry that helps us to better shift from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic state. So this, in my opinion, a little bit beyond theoretical, it is substantiated by the literature. This ability to shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic state requires a certain type of neurochemistry. And if many of us are already dealing with the genes that shift us over to this heightened state of alertness or rather stress, then we need that additional advantage. And I believe wholeheartedly suntheanine can do that for us. So here's the machinery that's in charge of this stress response or the fight or flight. The adrenal glands, you've got two of them. They sit on top both kidneys, pyramidal type-like structures. They pulse out cortisol, the notorious hormone that's in charge of retaining too much belly fat when we've got too much of this floating around for too long a period of time. And then the medulla, which puts out adrenaline into our blood supply nervous system. So the top brain centers, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, these control for the signal that goes to these adrenal glands and says, emit this adrenaline. And as I alluded to early on, even if you are an individual or individuals who are predisposed, even genetically, to a high stress aptitude, and their adrenals are constantly firing off, there are ways in which we can help these individuals out of that state. And I believe wholeheartedly suntheanine becomes a part of that mix. And here's how I know. So in a clinical sense, for well over 15 years now, not the entirety of my clinical experience, because this lab wasn't around at that point, I started testing uninvasively neurotransmitters through urine. Very good way to look at endpoints, metabolites of these neurotransmitters. So everything from serotonin to adrenaline, we talked about dopamine, noradrenaline, GABA. We look at all these neurotransmitters to get a good assessment as to where somebody is right now, lifetime, with respect to their brain chemistry. And what we're really looking at from the advantage of the inclusion of suntheanine is this GABAergic type activity. So this is also in the literature that suntheanine seems to increase dopamine and may manage or mitigate adrenaline and noradrenaline, and upregulate GABA. Those are all the favorable things that we would want to see when we are trying to downplay that heightened sympathetic response. Now, I want to bring this up. This is very, very important, the hormetic response. So all stress is not bad. I really, really want to emphasize that. All stress is not bad. Any stress, be it physical, mental, emotional, chemical, you name it, for too long a period of time can be bad. So chronic stress is often bad, but it's all dose dependent. So if you're not already familiar with hormesis, this is a response, very much a bell curve response, where too little of a dose of stress may not do anything, good or bad. Too high, and ultimately it may kill you. Just the right response, or just the right amount of stress, we call this the Goldilocks hormetic response, is perfect. And so how do we actually activate, or how do we improve the Goldilocks response? Well, it has a lot to do with engaging in stress purposefully, but also, and this is the point I want everyone to remember, the take home, the speed at which we are able to go from sympathetic fight or flight to parasympathetic rest and digest. So I'm going to pop back up here and I bring this cartoon back to your attention. And this is where I said there's a lot of innuendo here. So you've got a doc with his Suntheanine prescription. This patient wants to relax faster, better. He wants to be on the cutting edge of relaxation. What he actually might be saying, unbeknownst to himself, is that he wants to go from a state of sympathetic fight or flight stress, unable to fall asleep effectively, maybe waking up out in the middle of the night, mind racing, not being able to remember where his keys are, because that's what the brain does when you're in a sympathetic state. It's wanting to get out of that environment and come to safety. So where the keys are is not really important. But he is actually asking subconsciously his doctor for a way in which he can experience this hormetic stress response and speedily and effectively come out of sympathetic state to parasympathetic state with incredible ease. And so I say that because, very important, again, life will continue to throw curveballs. It will continue to be stressful. What we have to learn is how to manage this stress better, how to get from that sympathetic state to parasympathetic state better. And Suntheanine can help us do that, especially when we can use this along with other measures that have been proven out. I like to call them biohacking. You can call them, health interventions, whatever it is that you want to call them. And I'm going to share some of those with you now. Before I do, I want to underscore what I heard Braxton say earlier, and that is that theanine, or Suntheanine particularly, because this is where all the trials, human clinical trials, have proven out. We don't really care so much about the animal trials. That's one stage we have to get to before human clinical trials, of course, become abundant enough to rely on. But a lot of the other, powders that are out there called L-theanine may not be doing, probably aren't doing what we're seeing Suntheanine doing, and that is to enhance alpha wave so as to achieve that speed of recovery from sympathetic to parasympathetic state, so as to improve focus, attention, alertness, concentration, and relaxation without causing sedation. So we want more of this in life. So not that these other brain waves are bad. Like I suggested before about stress, not all stress is bad. We're meant to deal with acute stress. We have incredible machinery within our bodies to deal with acute stress. But too long of acute stress is like too much gamma brainwave activity, or for that matter, we know about being asleep too many hours a day is also not good. Balance, Goldilocks formula. So this is where Suntheanine works to increase alpha brainwave activity. I told you that we're bioelectric beings. This is the electricity output, EMG, that we're able to actually study. So there's the neurochemistry we look at, the genetics that predispose us to being a particular aptitude within our ability to manage stress. Many of us, again, we have this inability to come back, and we stay in this state of stress too long. And as it pertains to the biochemistry, which we can also test for, as I alluded to, we see that Suntheanine helps across all three levels. Can't change your genes, but can manage them better. Can't change, the predisposition, the DNA mom and dad have dealt you, but you can upregulate GABA. You can downregulate the excitatory neurotransmitters when they're too high for too long. Suntheanine helps with that. And it also, of course, on the electrical side, helps to induce this alpha wave activity. All right. It's important, I believe, to understand as it pertains to sleep, because achieving optimal sleep is, again, not just the hours you clock on the pillow. It's really understanding sleep architecture and then doing what you can to maximize sleep architecture on all aspects, on all facets. So sleep architecture, essentially misunderstood by a lot of people. Sleep architecture is really the steps, if you will, downward steps to get into your deep recovery phase of sleep, and then bounce up into what EMGs show us as REM, or rapid eye movement, where we're having dreams. Dreams are not the deepest phase of sleep. They are the lightest phase, actually, of sleep, second only to stage 1. But when you're dreaming, this is also very important. So if sleep architecture is stage 1 or a step, and you go down to stage 2, 3, and 4, and bounce up into REM, that's one cycle. That takes the average person about 90 minutes. Some of us are faster, some are a little slower, but that 90 minutes is important. We need 5 of these different, we need to remain in all of these particular phases for certain amounts of time, as you can see here, and we need 5 of all of these sleep stages, 1 through 5 cycles, 5 of them at night. So you could do the quick cowboy math there, 5 times 90 minutes, that's where you're getting the 7 to 8 hours recommended by the average healthcare practitioner expert. So the other thing I wanted to mention about sleep and the importance of sleep, we just come to realize, this was some kind of new information that I did some deep dive on as it related to writing my last book, and that is lymphatics. So we know about lymphatics under our arms, inguinal lymph nodes, in our GALT or gut-associated lymphoid tissue, 80% of our immune system down there. Very important for detoxifying, managing inflammation, sweeping up the mess after a viral or bacterial war. All of this is very important, but the brain doesn't have lymph. The brain has glial cells. They're non-thinking cells, and they only activate at night. And when they activate, they're in charge of sweeping up the oxidative stress from the day before. So when you think, when you have thoughts, when you have emotions, when there's neurochemistry and bioelectric chemistry going on, what's left over is oxidative stress. So just by you living and breathing and thinking and being, there is brain toxicity. So one of the major reasons you sleep at night is to activate lymphatic cells. And by activating those lymphatic cells, they're able to then discharge or get rid of the toxins. This is very, very important to understand, because we don't spend enough time here. Most of us are stressed out, exhausted, and our bodies want to shut down as hard and fast as possible. That's not necessarily healthy. So the individual who falls asleep like this, or partner's talking to them, what are you talking to me for? I just fell asleep. Not healthy. Nor is the individual that's taking too long to fall asleep. So there's a Goldilocks formula there as well. And it's typically 5 to 10 minutes. But the average person doesn't stay asleep, or rather stay in stage 2 for a long enough time. So what's happening is you're hitting the pillow, and then within a few minutes hitting stage 3. And again, clocking the amount of hours within these stages multiplied by 5 over the course of the night. It's the most important thing, the depth of sleep for recovery and rejuvenation. But if we don't stay in stage 2 for sort of the amount of time that our body requires, it's kind of akin to shutting down a car engine and then the radiator fan doesn't remain going. We've all heard that. So that you turn off the keys to the engine and something's still humming. That's purposeful. Or shutting off a computer and the motherboard fan is not working. You try shutting or turning that computer on again, it's probably going to be frozen. So like that, and the reason for this, of course, these fans within mechanical engines or computer technology, after that thing has been operating, it wants to cool down. It needs to cool down in order to function properly the next time you turn it back on. Same with our brain. Our brain needs to cool down. So if we don't remain in that sort of nice alpha wave activity for a long enough period of time, it doesn't segue effectively and can glitch out into stage 3 and 4. So that's really important to keep in mind. Optimal sleep starts with the right amount of alpha wave activity for these the particular grading and staging of the sleep architecture. We also want to optimize. We've heard of this sleep hygiene before. We want a very dark room. We want to be comfortable, and we want it to be cool. Lymphatics also don't work effectively when the room is too hot. So it's 65 to 68 degrees, believe it or not, is optimal. But for individuals who are having latency or delayed sleep and or are waking up prematurely, we call this advanced phase sleep disorder. In both of those instances, and anyone who feels like their mind is racing and can't fall asleep effectively, I always prescribe suntheanine in these instances. The elephant in the room, caffeine. It's an incredible nootropic, right? It's a stimulant. We often abuse it. But these are the biohacks I mentioned I get into. Caffeine is nothing I want you to stop. Nothing I ever recommend anyone stop. You know, after 2 or 3 p.m., depending on your genes and how you metabolize, it's probably a good idea. It stays in your system up to 7 or 8 hours. So the amount matters. But better with suntheanine. Why? It turns out that not only does suntheanine improve or enhance GABAergic function, offset the sympathetic nervous system, the part of the nervous system that's all about fight or flight, which caffeine supercharges. It also seems to counteract the negative effects, as you heard Braxton speak to, of caffeine. And so I always recommend the heavy coffee drinker supplement their caffeine or their coffee using suntheanine to offset those negative effects. Meditation, better with suntheanine. What are we trying to achieve when we meditate? We're not trying to achieve a mind that thinks of nothing. That's almost impossible, as any gold robe donning Buddhist monk will tell you. What you're trying to do is invite thoughts and quiet the mind and stay focused. That's alpha wave. That's exactly what the brain is trying to accomplish, or what the individual is trying to accomplish, is a quieted brain in alpha wave. This is enhanced significantly, so supports the literature, by adding suntheanine, about 15 to 20 minutes before a mindfulness-based stress reduction technique such as meditation. And the other thing that we know is, as many as there are signals from the gut to the brain, this whole gut-brain connection, there's equally or more signals, nerve connections from the heart to the brain. So the heart-brain connection is really now being studied, and a lot of literature coming down the pipe around how this brain and heart communicate. So there are more connections that go from the heart to the brain, in fact, than there are from the brain to the heart. And that's important because by taking suntheanine, what we're actually doing is affecting, again, that ability to transition from sympathetic to parasympathetic state. One of the issuances of that nerve chemistry actually starts in the heart. Might be the seat of emotions, as the traditional Chinese medicine puts it, over the last few millennia, for this very good reason. So when we do focused meditation or mindfulness-based stress reduction, and at the same time use a wearable that looks at heart rate variability, we see suntheanine improves heart rate variability. That is, the heart being in a congruent or coherent mode, non-stressed. And by the way, this work was done on the military, as well as some average folks in the population. And what we saw was an improved heart rate variability, the heart telling the brain everything is going to be okay. And you can test this for yourself. A lot of heart rate variability devices on the market. So with and without suntheanine, most of us will see a significant difference. Shinrin Yoku. This is a biohacking method of forest bathing, which translates from Japanese to English as forest bathing. So immersing ourselves in nature in order to increase exposure, not just to greenery and maybe the loved one or friends that you're walking with, but to negative ions, which the flora and fauna release, which boosts serotonin. By amplifying that from taking suntheanine before Shinrin Yoku or a forest bathing, you're going to see even more upregulation of dopamine through GABA and serotonin. So the feel good that you might get out of that experience will be enhanced. We hear a lot about breath work. One of my favorites is box breathing. So 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. You can do that anywhere, and road rage or stressful meeting at work, and you are grounded within minutes. if you know you're expecting, and this is all about preconceived notions, of course, where a lot of stress comes from, our anticipation of it, not necessarily the moment of it occurring, but that anticipation, that stressful meeting that you might have at work, or that date that you might be going on that night, whatever the case may be, you can augment the ability for your body to move from sympathetic to parasympathetic state by taking some Suntheanine. There's many chewables that are out on the market, and they work very, very well and quite quickly. You keep them in your purse or your pocket, and you chew those 15 minutes prior to the stressful event, along with some box breath. And boy, oh boy, that is going to significantly reduce stress and also keep your brain in that level of focus. I do this all the time. In fact, I'm on national television next week doing it live. It was a pre-record, and it'll be on TV across the nation. The purpose of this is not to enjoy being in a freezing environment. The purpose of this is, once again, to train the body to be okay with acute stress, and over time be faster, naturally, moving from this sympathetic state. Boy, let me tell you, when you're in 40-degree water, you are in sympathetic state. When you come out of the water and you've survived that particular event, your brain starts to, remember, neoplastic. Our brains connect, disconnect, reconnect more than we ever thought possible. So your brain will start to disconnect from probably will die and reconnect to, I just survived that. We hear a lot more about this coined term these days of resilience. This is exactly what this is doing, but better with Suntheanine. If you do this before 15 minutes before emerging, yeah, I'll get it straight. A cold immersion. By doing a cold immersion, this will enhance the experience, and of course, again, shift you into that parasympathetic state, or rest and digest, relax state faster. I know I'm coming up to time, so I'll just be quick. The same thing with heat exposure. Something you can time with a chewable or even a swallowable, 15 minutes, half an hour before doing a hot sauna. Incredible to, again, expose your body to and create heat shock proteins, expose your body to that little bit of Goldilocks amount of stress. And one of the purposes of this is, of course, to become more resilient. There are all kinds of devices out in the market. TDCS stands for transcranial direct current stimulation. And you can put these pads that deliver an electrical current in different parts of the brain. This one here is focused on the prefrontal cortex in a manner that it's sending a signal that's actually going to enhance firing of those particular nerves and various pathways that science has mapped up. If you were to take Suntheanine prior to doing a TDCS, we have shown in smaller studies that it actually enhanced those neural pathways. So once again, this is the nerves that fire together, wire together. The more you're able to essentially prove out that you are not as stressed as you otherwise would have been, entered that particular environment, and the more that you come out of these experiences, the more these nerves fire together, the more able you are to deal and manage with stress, resilience. And last but not least, yoga, for sure better with Suntheanine, as is massage. I'll just end off in saying, this is not just white paper research that I've done, what I might have been exposed to in the literature, or applying this with patients over the last 20 plus years. I have spent the last 12 or 13 or so years traveling the globe, boots on the ground, into the manufacturers, the places that make the raw materials that supply, amazing companies like NutraScience. So I've been there, boots on the ground, seeing these manufacturers and how and what they produce. And I visited Taiyo both in Japan. Those are the tea leaves behind me there, which, by the way, of course, we've come to learn it's prohibitively expensive to extract theanine from green tea. So there aren't really there's no one doing that. It's a fermentation process that's going to yield the L-isomer in the way that we want it for safety efficacy. There I am in India, visiting the Tyllucid conglomerate, and wanted to say, to leave off with this whole notion, I'm pretty sure we're clear at this point, to achieve therapeutic response is not to drink green tea. Green tea, 4 to maybe 10 at the most milligrams for average cup of green tea, more in matcha. I was also blessed to be able to do a deep dive and a documentary with some Buddhist monks at the base of Mount Shibuya in Japan to learn more about how they meditate, and they drink a lot of green tea, upwards of maybe 10 cups a day. So they might be achieving therapeutic range. Therapeutic range in a clinical setting, what I offer my patients, what I take myself, is between 200 milligrams once to twice a day. That's what you're going to get with suntheanine, and that's what ultimately you want to achieve. That range that's going to get you that sharper mind focus, attention, alertness, concentration, all while having more of a state of relaxation, better sleep, and overall less stress. And I will leave it there. I'm not sure if we're doing any questions, but happy to take them if we are.
Okay, thank you so much, Bryce. We are happy to stick around and take some questions if you are available. That is up to you. Okay, fantastic. So I have seen a few come through. Let's start with, do you recommend taking suntheanine in the morning or the evening or both?
I would absolutely recommend both. That was that last slide, once or twice a day. Certainly, if you're the individual who tends to experience more stress during your work day, the morning dose is that much more important if you have no problem with sleep. But if you're the individual, by the way, a handful of studies done on children, this is how safe this is in youngsters. So safety and efficacy is there. If you've got ADHD, the one thing, or if you've been diagnosed on the spectrum, the one thing you want to ensure is a deep, restful sleep. And studies have proven that out by having an increased alpha wave activity and getting a deeper, richer sleep, then the symptoms of ADHD will improve. So I'd ask everyone to certainly try twice a day. But if you've got the more of issues with sleep, the evening time dose is more important. If it's more sort of that sympathetic state I referred to, or stress during the day, then the morning time is more important. But certainly safe 200 milligrams twice a day for adults.
Thank you. We have another question that I am going to provide an answer for, but if you have some information on it too, that would be fantastic. So this question says, can you comment on molecular conformation of enzyme synthesized versus chemical synthesis and receptor interactions? Analysis by HPLC has shown some differences in structure between enzyme versus chemical synthesis of L-theanine, but there's still more to learn. We haven't fully elucidated all of those details yet. Okay, do you want to respond to that, Bryce?
I'm familiar with, as exactly as you put it. I mean, I'm more of the in vivo. And so again, I would defer to my objective clinical findings with the urinary and metabolites and suggest that whatever is going on as it pertains to suntheanine, I really, I've stuck with that particular ingredient. It is upregulating the neurotransmitter class of inhibition and downregulating the excitatory neurotransmitter class. So what we call neuromodulation is what I've seen in humans in my clinical practice.
Okay. We have another question that says, with patients with sleep apnea who have difficulty with restorative sleep, is suntheanine a safe option?
Do you want me to take that?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So it is not depressing. It is non-suppressing. So no, it's not going to, inhibit respiration. And that's exactly one of the benefits of its mechanism of action. So increasing alpha wave so as to improve sleep architecture, so as to improve or defend against advanced phase sleep disorder dysfunctions without depressing. So it won't depress or suppress the autonomic nervous system or the pons or the reticular activating system or any of the systems in charge of breath and respiration.
Great. Let's do one more question. This one is also about sleep. Do you prefer recommending suntheanine as a single ingredient or in formulation with other sleep aids? And I guess actually that could apply to any other ingredient, not just sleep aids. So we'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So, what I'd recommend, so I'm a stickler, of course, for what it is you're looking for on the bottle. And I find that a lot of combination formulas are unfortunately run the risk of what we refer to in the industry as pixie dusting. And so, whether it's a combination formula, for which of course I'd have to know what these other ingredients may be, what you're really wanting is a therapeutic range of the suntheanine. So between 100 to 200 within that single capsule, and don't settle for anything or much less than that, again, to achieve the therapeutic response that we know exists in literature. A lot of the standalones do that without question. So, the standalone single ingredient chewables or the single ingredient capsules. So I typically defer to those, especially when I'm wanting to achieve a therapeutic response without any other intervention of other ingredients. But there are those that are very, synergistic, and it depends on the individual how I may or may not add or include other things, herbs. The trick is, especially if you're an individual who's not otherwise seeing somebody like myself, is what are these other adaptogens or other herbs going to do to me or for me compared to suntheanine on its own? So I'm not opposed to, combo, or multi-ingredient, so long as you're getting the therapeutic range. But I like full control. If I'm really trying something that's going to work with an individual or not, then I go to the clean, individual ingredient formula, if that makes sense.
It does. Great. That is a great response to that question and all of them. Thank you very much for your time, Bryce. I certainly learned something. I hope that you all did. I believe that we have one final just wrap up slide to share with our information in case anybody missed it the first time around. There we go. Okay.
Any leftover questions we will reach out to answer further, but just wanted to put this back up here in case you guys anyone wants to reach out to us directly. We really appreciate everybody's time, your time, Bryce, everything you went through there. That was actually pretty awesome. Very interesting. Yeah, we appreciate you guys stopping by, and please reach out if you have anything else.